The mining station floated in silence at the edge of the asteroid belt, far from Earth, far from everything familiar. Daniel was used to silence. He had worked here for years, cutting stone, collecting metals, fixing broken machines, and sending them back to Earth. Most men hated the loneliness, but for Daniel, it was easier than facing the empty house he had left behind. One shift. As he checked the scanners for drifting rocks, something unusual appeared on the screen. A shape, large, broken, and not made of stone. At first he thought it was human wreckage, maybe an old cargo ship. But when he adjusted the sensors, his heart stopped. The design was wrong. Too smooth, too curved, glowing faintly even in the void of space. It was not human. Daniel hesitated. The other workers would laugh if he said what he truly saw. They believed in profit, not mysteries. Yet something in him stirred. Curiosity, a pull stronger than fear. He requested a shuttle and flew toward the wreck. The closer he came, the more his breath caught in his chest. The ship was massive, torn open as if by war or disaster. Its once shining surface now floated in pieces, drifting like shattered glass. He entered carefully, the shuttle docking against the broken hull. Inside, the corridors were silent, glowing faintly blue. Strange patterns covered the walls, symbols like flowing rivers, alive yet frozen. Daniel moved slowly, his boots echoing on the cold floor. He expected to find only emptiness. But then he saw her. At first, he thought she was a statue, lying still in the shadow of a collapsed wall. She was small, no taller than a child, and her body glowed softly like silver light wrapped in skin. Her hair floated around her face, strands shimmering like threads of glass. Her eyes were half open, wide and endless, reflecting the stars. She breathed faintly, each rise of her chest a fragile struggle. Daniel froze. He had never seen anything like her. Fear gripped him, but another feeling rose above it, something tender, protective. She looked helpless, as though the wreck itself had crushed the life from her. Slowly, Daniel knelt beside her. Her eyes shifted, locking on him. A whisper escaped her lips, so soft he could barely hear. The sound was musical, but the words were not his language. Her hand trembled as she tried to push herself up, but her strength failed and she collapsed again. Daniel's heart raced. He wanted to help, but what if touching her was dangerous? What if she was poisonous or carried some alien disease? Yet when he saw the fear in her wide, shimmering eyes, he couldn't walk away. Carefully, he slipped his arms beneath her small frame. She weighed almost nothing, as if her bones were made of light. The moment he touched her, she flinched sharply. A cry escaped her lips, filled with alarm, but then something changed. She stared at him, her body stiff, her breath shaking. She whispered again, her words broken, lost. But Daniel understood the meaning in her trembling tone. She was afraid, but she also needed him. He carried her back to the shuttle. Every step felt heavier than the last. Not because of her weight, but because of what it meant. He was carrying the unknown. He was carrying life that no human had ever held before. Back at the station, Daniel laid her gently on a cot inside his quarters. He offered water, food, anything that might comfort her. She turned her face away at first, whispering sounds he couldn't understand. Her body shook, her small hands gripping the blanket tightly as though she expected harm. Daniel sat near her, not too close, speaking softly. "It's okay. You're safe. I won't hurt you." He repeated these words, though he knew she didn't understand. Still, his voice seemed to calm her. Her breathing slowed, her wide eyes closing little by little. For hours, Daniel stayed awake, watching her sleep. He thought about the risk he had taken. If the station guards discovered her, they would drag her away for study. To them, she would be nothing more than a specimen. But to Daniel, she was more than that already. She was alive. She was fragile. She was someone who needed him. When she woke again, the fear in her eyes had not disappeared, but it had softened. She watched him closely, as though trying to decide if he was real or another dream. He held out a piece of bread. At first, she refused, turning her head. But when Daniel took a bite himself, smiling gently, she hesitated. Her hand, trembling like a leaf, reached out and took the smallest piece. She ate slowly, cautiously, but she ate. That small act broke the wall between them. Days passed, and though she still flinched at sudden movements, she began to trust him. She followed his hand when he pointed, repeating soft sounds in her own tongue. Daniel tried to mimic them, failing more often than not, but she giggled once, a tiny sound so light it almost disappeared. That laugh struck Daniel like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then, one night, as silence filled the room, something extraordinary happened. She sat up, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Slowly, she stretched her hand toward him, her fingers shaking. Daniel didn't move. He let her choose. Her hand touched his arm. Her skin was cold, softer than silk, and her touch was feather-light, as though she feared she might break him. Her breath caught, and in a voice trembling with emotion, she whispered words that the translator implant in Daniel's ear finally caught. "You're the first I've ever touched." Daniel's chest tightened. The weight of her words pressed against his heart. He realized then that her people must have lived differently, separate, untouched, afraid of contact. And yet, in her loneliness and fear, she had chosen him. In that fragile touch, Daniel felt a bond stronger than any contract, stronger than any order from Earth. It was the beginning of something he did not yet understand, but something he knew he would protect with everything he had. The mining station hummed quietly around them, but for Daniel, the universe had shifted. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. The mining station had never felt so alive. For years, Daniel had moved through the same narrow halls, breathing the same recycled air, listening to the same buzzing machines. It was a routine that dulled the soul. But now everything had changed. In his small quarters, an alien girl rested, and her presence filled the silence with meaning. Her name, he learned slowly, was Elira. At first, the sound was faint, whispered through trembling lips, but Daniel repeated it until she nodded, her glowing eyes softening. Elira. The name felt like a secret, a treasure hidden in the cold void of space. She did not trust easily. When Daniel brought food, she would turn her face away. Her body curled tight as if she expected a blow. Daniel never forced her. He set the food nearby, ate a little himself, then left it within her reach. Hours later, when he pretended not to look, he would see her small hands lift the bread or fruit, nibbling carefully. Each bite was cautious, but each bite was progress. Water was harder. She studied the glass as if it were poison. Only when Daniel drank deeply first did she finally take a sip, her lips touching the rim as though it were sacred. When the cool liquid touched her tongue, her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw wonder instead of fear. She copied him often. When he sat, she sat. When he lifted a spoon, she lifted one too, though clumsily. When he spoke, she listened, tilting her head like a child studying a new sound. Slowly, she began to repeat his words. At first, only small things. Yes, no, water. Her voice was shaky, her accent strange, but every word felt like a victory. Daniel taught her patiently. He pointed to objects, naming them slowly. Chair, table, light. Elira would try, sometimes failing, sometimes laughing softly when she stumbled. That laugh, it was quiet, fragile, but it carried more warmth than the entire station. But trust was not built in words alone. It showed in her eyes. In the beginning, they were wide with fear, watching his every move. But as days passed, they softened. She began to look at him differently, not as a threat, but as something else, something she was still learning to name. One night, as the low hum of the station filled the silence, Elira sat awake while Daniel repaired a small machine. His hands were steady, his eyes focused, but he felt her gaze on him. When he looked up, she startled and glanced away. Then slowly her hand reached across the blanket. Daniel froze. He did not move, letting her decide. Her fingers trembled, silver against the dim light, before they touched his arm. The contact was so light it could have been a breeze. Her skin was cool, smoother than silk. Her breath shook as she whispered, "You." The first, Daniel's heart pounded. Through the translator in his ear, the broken words became whole. "You're the first I've ever touched." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Daniel wanted to speak, but words felt too small. Instead, he covered her hand gently with his own. She did not pull away. Her eyes shimmered, tears gathering at the edges. Elira pulled her hand back after a moment, clutching it to her chest as if the memory of his warmth was too much to hold. She whispered something in her own language, soft, mournful, and Daniel felt a pang in his chest. She was lonely. She was afraid, and yet she had chosen him. The next days were different. She began sitting closer to him, no longer hiding behind distance. She ate when he ate, she spoke when he spoke, and once when he laughed at a memory she smiled. Not fully, but enough to light her whole face. Still, there were shadows in her eyes. Daniel noticed how sometimes when she believed he was asleep, she stared at the ceiling with tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered names, perhaps of her people, perhaps of family she feared she would never see again. Daniel never interrupted. He only listened, letting her grief flow into the quiet air. In those moments, he understood her more deeply. Elira was not just an alien. She was a child of a broken world, stranded among strangers. Her laughter was fragile because it had to fight through sorrow. Her touch was precious because it had cost her courage. One evening, Daniel made a promise he had never spoken aloud before. He sat beside her, his hand resting near hers. "I'll protect you," he said softly. "No one will hurt you, not while I'm here." She tilted her head, struggling with the words. Through the translator, her voice came broken but clear. "Promise?" Daniel nodded. "Promise." Her eyes glowed brighter for a moment, as if light itself answered that vow. She whispered his name, slowly, carefully. Dan. Hale. It was the first time she had said it. Hearing it from her lips made his chest tighten, as though the universe itself had shifted. Trust grew, not in leaps, but in fragile steps. Elira began exploring his quarters, touching objects with wide-eyed curiosity. She traced the edges of a photo of Earth, whispering softly, "Home?" Daniel nodded, showing her the blue oceans and green lands. She stared at the picture for a long time, then pressed it to her chest as though she could feel its warmth. When Daniel worked outside in the corridors, fixing pipes or adjusting scanners, Elira followed. She stayed close, her small frame shadowing his larger one, watching every move. Sometimes she reached out not to cling but to reassure herself he was real. And slowly the station itself began to change. Where once there had been silence, now there was laughter, whispers, and learning. Where once Daniel had been alone, now he was not. But deep inside, both of them knew this fragile peace could not last forever. The others would notice. The station was not blind. Secrets could not stay hidden in the cold void of space. Still, for now, Daniel chose not to think of that. For now, there was only Elira, her trembling voice, her glowing eyes, her fragile laughter. For now, there was only trust, slowly built between two souls who should have been enemies but had instead become something else entirely. And as Elira drifted to sleep that night, curled under the blanket with her hand near his, Daniel whispered a vow only the stars could hear. "I'll keep my promise, whatever it takes." Days turned into weeks, and the mining station was no longer the same for Daniel. The dull silence that had once surrounded him was broken, not by machines but by soft laughter, broken words, and curious questions. Elira was no longer only a frightened stranger. She was becoming part of his world. Each morning, Daniel would wake to find Elira sitting nearby, waiting. Her glowing eyes followed him closely as though his movement itself gave her comfort. Sometimes she would repeat his name softly, Dan, just to see him turn and smile. She liked how his face changed when he smiled. It made the cold metal walls seem less lonely. Teaching her became Daniel's new purpose. He would point to objects, saying their names slowly. "Table," he would say, tapping the surface. Elira would mimic the word, sometimes pronouncing it wrong, sometimes getting it right. When she made mistakes, she would cover her mouth and giggle. Daniel loved that giggle. It was light, like a bird taking flight. One afternoon, he gave her a notebook and a pen. She had never seen such things before. At first, she held the pen awkwardly, but then carefully she copied the shapes he drew. Letters, numbers, simple lines. Her small fingers trembled, but her determination was fierce. When she managed to write her own name in crooked letters, Elira, her face lit up with pride. Daniel felt warmth flood his chest, but beneath her growing trust there was sadness. Sometimes Daniel found her staring at the stars through the small station window. Her eyes shimmered and her lips whispered words in her own language. He couldn't understand them, but the sound was heavy with grief. She was remembering her people, the ones she had lost. Daniel wanted to tell her she was not alone, but he also knew words could not heal every wound. One night she sat close to him, her small shoulders trembling. Daniel asked softly, "What is it?" Elira struggled, her broken English mixing with her own tongue. But he understood enough. She feared she was the last of her kind. The loneliness weighed on her like chains. Daniel listened, his chest aching. He knew that loneliness too well. Back on Earth, he had lost his family in an accident years ago. He had chosen the mining station because it was easier to live with machines than to live with grief. Now, as Elira spoke of her pain, he felt their wounds echoing each other. Two souls, different worlds, same sorrow. "I know," he whispered, placing a hand gently over hers. "I know what it's like." Elira stared at him, her glowing eyes wide. She squeezed his hand, her fingers trembling but strong. In that moment, no words were needed. They both understood. They were no longer alone. As the days passed, their bond deepened. Elira began to smile more often. She laughed when Daniel tried to copy her alien words and failed miserably. She clapped her hands when he showed her pictures of Earth, mountains, oceans, trees. "Beautiful," she whispered, pressing the photo against her chest. Sometimes Daniel would tell her stories of his childhood. Simple things, running through fields, playing with his little sister, fishing by a quiet river. Elira listened with wide eyes as if trying to imagine every detail. Then she would tell her own stories, her words broken but full of life. She spoke of her people's glowing gardens, of skies that shimmered with colors unknown to humans, of songs that healed the heart. Daniel closed his eyes as she spoke, trying to see it through her eyes. But there were moments of fear too. Once, while exploring the station's empty corridors, they passed a group of workers. Elira clung to Daniel's arm, her body stiff with terror. The men stared, whispering among themselves, their eyes cold. Daniel quickly led her away, but he knew the danger. If others discovered her fully, they would not see Elira the way he did. They would see her as a prize, a specimen to be studied. That night, Elira could not sleep. She sat curled in the corner, trembling. Daniel sat beside her, whispering gently, "It's okay. You're safe with me." Slowly, she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time, she allowed herself to close her eyes while touching another being. Her voice, soft as a breath, whispered, "Promise?" Daniel placed his arm around her, holding her gently. "Promise," he said again, and meant it with every fiber of his being. From then on, Elira began to grow braver. She walked the halls with Daniel, her steps hesitant but steady. She asked more questions, pointing at machines and tools, eager to learn. She even tried helping him repair a broken pipe, her small hands clumsy but determined. Daniel watched her with pride. She was not just surviving anymore, she was living. But what touched him most was how she trusted him with her tears. One evening, as the artificial night cycle dimmed the lights, Elira sat by the window. Tears streamed down her silver cheeks. Daniel moved to sit beside her. Without words, she reached for his hand, holding it tightly as she cried. He didn't try to stop her tears. He simply sat there, letting her grief flow, sharing the silence with her. When she finally rested her head against him, exhausted, Daniel whispered, "You're not alone anymore." Her eyes closed, and she whispered back, "Never alone, with Daniel." Hearing his name on her lips like that broke something open inside him. For years, he had built walls around his heart, but Elira was breaking them with every fragile smile, every trembling laugh, every whispered promise. And so, in the quiet hum of the mining station, among cold metal and endless stars, something rare was born. Not just trust, not just friendship, something deeper. A bond that crossed the boundaries of species, language, and fear. It was fragile, like a small flame in a storm. But Daniel knew he would protect it. He would protect her. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer felt like a man waiting for life to end. He felt like a man with something to live for. And Elira, for the first time in her life, no longer felt like a child lost in the dark. She felt like someone had finally found her. For a time, Daniel believed their fragile world might last forever. Each day with Elira felt brighter, each night warmer. But nothing hidden stays safe in a place where men are always hungry for power. The mining station was small, and secrets never stayed secret for long. Workers had begun to whisper. They saw Daniel walking with someone in the shadows of the corridors. They noticed food disappearing faster than one man could eat. They heard faint laughter, not human, floating from his quarters when he thought the station slept. At first, the whispers were small, half-jokes traded in the mess hall. But suspicion grew like fire, and fire always found fuel. One afternoon, while Daniel was repairing a broken oxygen valve, two miners confronted him. "You hiding something, Harper?" one asked, narrowing his eyes. His name was Vance, a man who cared more for credits than for life. You've been acting strange. Got company in your room, maybe? Daniel forced a steady voice. Just tired. Working too many shifts. But Vance was not fooled. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you've got something worth hiding, the station commander will want to know. And if it's alien, well, that could be worth more than your whole life. Daniel's jaw tightened. He walked away without answering, but dread coiled in his chest. The whispers were spreading, and once command caught the scent, there would be no hiding Elira. That evening, when he returned to his quarters, Elira ran to him, her glowing eyes filled with worry. She had sensed the tension. Daniel, danger? She asked in her halting English. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing a strand of shimmering hair from her face. Not yet. But we have to be careful. Her small hands gripped his tightly, trembling. They take me? Daniel shook his head firmly. I won't let them. I promised, remember? She nodded, but fear lingered in her eyes. She trusted him, but she knew the weight of human greed even if she didn't fully understand it. The next day, the message arrived. From Earth Command, report of alien life on station. If true, surrender for research, failure to comply. Treason. Daniel's blood ran cold as he read the order. It was over. Someone had already reported him. That night he sat with Elira in silence. She traced the lines of his hand with her small fingers, sensing his unease. Finally she whispered, They come? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Her eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. No cage, no. Cut. Please. The translator cracked on her last word, but Daniel understood. She had seen this before. Her people had been taken once, studied, treated not as living beings but as puzzles to be solved. She would rather die than return to that fate. Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled her into his arms, holding her trembling body against his chest. I won't let them. Not while I'm alive. The next day the guards came. They wore heavy boots and carried stun rifles, their faces hard. The commander himself followed, his voice cold. Harper, step aside. By order of Earth Command, the specimen is to be taken. Elira clung to Daniel's arm, hiding behind him. Her silver glow trembled like a candle in the wind. Daniel stood tall, his body blocking the doorway. She's not a specimen. She's not yours to take, the commander sneered. She's alien technology, knowledge, power. She doesn't belong to you, Harper. She belongs to science. Daniel's hands shook, but his voice was steady. She belongs to herself. And she trusts me. You'll have to go through me first. The guards moved forward. Elira whimpered, her grip tightening on Daniel's sleeve. He turned to her, whispering quickly, Listen. Go into the maintenance tunnel. Hide. No matter what you hear, stay hidden. I'll come for you. Her eyes widened in horror. No, Daniel. But he pressed her small hands to his chest. Trust me, promise. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered back, Promise. Reluctantly, Elira slipped into the narrow tunnel as Daniel stood to face the guards. The first blow came fast, a rifle butt slamming into his ribs. Pain exploded, but Daniel didn't fall. He fought with his fists, with his fury, with the desperate strength of a man defending the only light left in his life. The guards outnumbered him. They struck him again and again, boots against his side, fists against his face. Blood filled his mouth, his vision blurred, but he did not give in. Where is she? The commander shouted, furious. Daniel spat blood on the floor. She's not yours to take. The guard slammed him against the wall. His body ached, his bones screamed, but he refused to speak. Every second he kept them focused on him was another second Elira remained safe. Elira, hidden in the shadows of the tunnel, heard everything. She pressed her trembling hands over her ears, but Daniel's cries still reached her. Her silver tears fell onto the cold floor. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to obey. But inside her heart something stronger began to rise. She had always been told that touch was dangerous, that her kind must remain separate, untouched. But Daniel had shown her another truth. His touch had given her warmth, trust, love. And now he was being broken for her sake. Her people had feared the power of touch. Elira, for the first time, understood its strength. She would not hide. She would not let him fall alone. With trembling steps, she crawled from the tunnel, her small figure glowing brighter than ever before. The guards froze, their eyes wide. For the first time, they saw not a helpless child, but something radiant, something untamed. Daniel, bleeding and half-conscious, saw her through the haze. His heart clenched. Elira, no, he whispered. But Elira stood tall, her silver hair shimmering, her hands clenched at her sides. Her voice, though broken, rang clear across the room. No more. The days aboard the alien vessel passed slowly, yet for Ethan, every moment with Lyra carried a strange beauty. He had stopped counting how many stars drifted past the windows. He had stopped measuring time by the glowing cycles of the ship's artificial light. What mattered to him now was her presence. She would appear suddenly, almost silently, like a shadow carrying light in her hands, and his chest would feel lighter each time. Lyra had begun to speak more freely. Her voice, soft and unsure at first, had gained strength. She told Ethan about her people, the fragile race hidden in the shadow of the galaxy. They had avoided all other life, fearing violence and destruction. Their bodies, delicate and small, were never built for war. Instead, they learned to hide, to build ships that wandered, to survive without touch, without warmth, without bonds. Ethan listened, sometimes unable to believe what he was hearing. A species that never touched? That never dared to stand close enough to feel another's heartbeat. For him, human connection was as natural as breathing. A handshake, a hug, a pat on the back. These were things he had grown up with, small gestures of trust. To imagine a life without them felt like imagining a life without air, and yet when he looked at Lyra, he saw how deeply she had longed for that missing piece. Her eyes would drift to his hands when he moved them. Her gaze would linger on the curve of his shoulders, the warmth of his breath in the cold air. She was studying him, not just with her mind, but with her very soul. One evening, as the ship passed through a nebula glowing like crushed jewels, Lyra asked a question that broke the fragile calm. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice carrying both fear and longing, "what is it like to hold someone?" The human froze. The question was simple, yet he could hear the storm beneath it. Slowly he looked at her, this petite alien, smaller than his own shadow, her silver eyes wide with wonder. He realized she had never known the comfort of arms wrapping around her, never felt the way two bodies shared warmth in silence. "It's safe," Ethan said finally. His voice grew softer, more careful. "When you hold someone, you feel less alone. Their heartbeat reminds you that you're not just living for yourself. You're living together, even if only for a moment." Lyra's lips parted. She breathed in like she was trying to hold on to his words, to etch them into her very being. Then very slowly she reached out. Her hand trembled as it moved closer to his, fingers delicate as falling leaves. She stopped just before touching him, hovering in hesitation. Her kind had forbidden touch for ages. It was not just cultural, it was survival. Their fragile skin, their frail bones, their deep fears had built an invisible wall between them. But here she was, breaking that wall, because of him. Ethan did not move. He let her come to him, let her fight the fear inside. Finally, her fingers brushed his hand. It was the faintest contact, as if a butterfly's wing had landed on his skin. Her breath caught. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "You're warm," she whispered. Ethan gave a small smile. "So are you." It was nothing, and yet it was everything. That single touch carried more meaning than all the stars surrounding them. For Lyra, it was the first act of rebellion against centuries of silence. For Ethan, it was a reminder of what it meant to be human, sharing warmth no matter the distance, no matter the fear. But their fragile moment did not last. The ship trembled. Lights flickered red across the walls. An alarm rang, sharp and cold, breaking the spell. Lyra pulled back her hand as if burned, her face pale with dread. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, standing quickly. Her voice shook. "We've been found." By who, she did not need to explain. Ethan could see it in her eyes. The predators of the galaxy, the ones her people had hidden from. A race so ruthless that even whispers of them carried terror. "Listen to me," Lyra said quickly, her tone urgent now. "You must stay in this chamber. Do not open the door. No matter what you hear." Ethan stepped forward. "Lyra, wait. If you're in danger, I can't just—" "You must," she cried, cutting him off. For the first time, her voice rose above a whisper. "They will not harm me if I obey. But if they find you—" Her voice broke. "You are human. You are different. They will not forgive that." Ethan clenched his fists. Every part of him wanted to fight, to stand by her side, but the fear in her voice was undeniable. She had lived in hiding her whole life, always running, always fearing, and now, because of him, her world had been exposed. The ship shook again, harder this time. Somewhere in the distance, metal screamed under pressure. Lyra's eyes filled with desperation. She turned, moving toward the door. But before she left, she looked back at him. Her silver eyes shimmered with unspoken words. For a second, she seemed as if she wanted to reach for him again, to hold on to that warmth she had just discovered. Instead, she whispered, "You're the first I've ever touched." And then she was gone. The door sealed shut, leaving Ethan alone in the silence, his heart pounding like a war drum. He pressed his hand against the cold surface, remembering the fragile brush of her fingers. That small touch now burned in him like fire. He could not stay still. He could not obey. Something inside him roared louder than fear. Humanity was built to protect, to fight when loved ones were in danger. Lyra had shown him her deepest secret, her most fragile truth. He could not let her face the storm alone. The alarm screamed. The stars outside burned like warning torches. Ethan's jaw tightened as he made his choice. He was human, and no force in the universe would keep him from fighting for her. The silence in the chamber pressed heavily against Ethan's chest. The alarms had stopped, replaced by a low vibration running through the walls like a heartbeat of something alive and hostile. He sat on the floor, fists clenched, fighting the urge to smash the door open. Lyra's last words echoed endlessly in his mind. "You're the first I've ever touched." That fragile confession had bound him to her in a way deeper than chains. She had broken the fear of her people for him. She had dared to reach across the wall of isolation. How could he sit and do nothing now while she faced enemies alone? Ethan stood. His breath was heavy, but his decision was clear. Humans were not made for silence and obedience. They were made to resist, to protect, to fight when something precious was at risk. He searched the room quickly. The chamber was bare, but his eyes found a panel on the wall, loose at the edges. With brute force, he pried it open, revealing wires and a small glowing core. His hands moved instinctively. He wasn't an engineer, but years of fixing broken machines on Earth had given him confidence. He tore a piece of metal free, shaping it into a crude bar. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The door loomed in front of him, silent and cold. Ethan pressed his hand against it, as if he could still feel the faint trace of Lyra's touch on the other side. "I'm coming," he whispered, and slammed his makeshift weapon into the lock. Sparks flew. The door hissed, groaned, then slid open. The hallway outside was chaos. Lights flickered and smoke trailed along the ceiling. Strange shadows moved at the far end, figures that did not belong to Lyra's gentle kind. They were taller, their bodies sharp and armored like nightmares forged from steel. Their voices were harsh clicks echoing like knives in the dark. Ethan's jaw tightened. He kept low, moving carefully along the wall. His mind screamed at him to run, to hide, but his heart burned with a single truth. Lyra needed him. He followed the sound of her voice. It wasn't loud, barely more than a whisper, but to him it was the brightest signal in the galaxy. He rounded a corner and froze. There she was, surrounded by 3 of the predators. Her small frame looked even smaller next to their hulking bodies. They barked words in a tongue Ethan couldn't understand, their claws twitching with menace. Lyra stood straight, but he could see her trembling. Ethan's blood boiled. He gripped his metal bar tighter. One of the aliens reached toward her. Without thinking, Ethan charged. The crash of his body against the armored creature was like stone striking stone. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He swung the metal bar with all his strength. It cracked against the alien's head, sparks bursting. The creature staggered back with a roar. The others turned, their eyes narrowing. Lyra gasped, her silver eyes widening. "Ethan," she cried. Her voice gave him strength. The predators lunged, but Ethan moved with desperate fury. He ducked under a strike, swung the bar again, and slammed it into another's joint. The alien howled, collapsing to one knee. The third raised a weapon, a glowing blade of energy. Ethan's heart froze. But before it could strike, Lyra acted. She raised her small hand, and for the first time he saw her power. A pulse of light burst from her palm, hitting the creature's chest. It screamed, stumbling back in shock. Ethan stared at her in awe. She had always seemed fragile, delicate. But in that moment he saw the truth. There was strength in her, quiet but fierce, waiting to be awakened. Together, they fought. Ethan with his raw human will, Lyra with the hidden spark of her people. They were clumsy, desperate, but united, and somehow it was enough. The last predator fell with a heavy crash, its body smoking from Lyra's light and Ethan's blows. The hallway was silent again except for their ragged breaths. Ethan dropped the metal bar, his arms shaking. Lyra ran to him, her small hands clutching his arm. You shouldn't have come, she whispered, tears in her eyes. He looked down at her, his chest heaving, and managed a faint smile. I told you. I'm human. We don't leave the people we care about. Her lips trembled. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then, as if unable to stop herself, she pressed her forehead gently against his chest. The contact was brief, but Ethan felt her trembling ease, as if she had finally found something solid in the storm. But their fight was not over. In the distance, more footsteps echoed. The predators were not done. Lyra pulled back, her eyes burning with urgency. We can't stay. There will be more, stronger. My people never fight, they only hide. But you... She hesitated, her voice breaking. You fight for me. Ethan nodded. Then we'll run together. And if they come again, we'll fight again. Her silver eyes locked onto his. In them he saw fear, hope, and something deeper. A trust so raw it made his chest ache. Ethan, she whispered, her voice softer than the stars outside. You are not like any I've ever known. You are more. He reached down, carefully taking her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. Her small fingers curled into his, fragile yet firm. They moved together through the broken corridors side by side, two souls from different worlds bound by something greater than fear. The galaxy had told Lyra all her life that touch was danger, that closeness was death. But now, holding Ethan's hand, she felt alive for the first time. And Ethan, with every step, felt a fire in his chest. Not just to survive, not just to fight, but to protect the one who had whispered her deepest truth into his soul. Whatever waited ahead, he knew this. He would not let go. Not of her hand. Not of her heart.